Thank you very much for joining me today on this really interesting discussion that we want to have about monkeypox. Now, it's a tremendous privilege for me to be able to be in contact with experts across the world. And I truly appreciate that they're willing to come and share their knowledge, share their experience, and give us an insight into things that we probably wouldn't be able to get answers to very quickly. And so, with tremendous honor to have with me today, two, and we'll probably have a third person with us. We've got Grant McFadden from the USA and Dr. Christopher Ring from the UK. And so, the first thing I'd like to ask you gentlemen to do is to do a quick introduction, and so that everybody can know who you are. Do you mind if I start with you first, Grant? Just give us an idea as to who you are and what you do.
Certainly. How are you doing? My name is Grant McFadden. I'm a professor at Arizona State University in the United States, and I'm a virologist, and my expertise is in poxviruses, and my lab studies diseases that are caused by poxviruses. And my research interest is in how poxviruses choose what kind of host they will infect, what kind of tissue they will infect, and what kind of cell they will infect. Because all viruses are very picky about the host, the tissues, and the cells they grow in. And I'm very interested in how that works out. My own lab studies a virus that is normally trapped in rabbits. It's called myxoma virus, and it causes a disease in rabbits called myxomatosis. However, the virus is trapped in rabbits. It can't exit to any other host, and it's harmless for humans and mice. Based on my expertise, I became an advisor for the WHO supervisory committee overseeing smallpox and spent a number of years observing the countermeasures that were being evolved in terms of new drugs, new vaccines, safer vaccines against smallpox. And some of those can be deployed against monkeypox, which is one of the reasons that I'm talking to you today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And Chris?
Hi, yeah, my name's Chris Ring. This is a tough act to follow after Grant's introduction, I have to say. But anyway, I'm a microbiologist with particular expertise in virology, currently working at Middlesex University in London, UK. Over the years, I've been involved in research in a variety of different viruses, including Epstein-Barr virus, hepatitis C, respiratory syncytial virus, papillomavirus, influenza, and I've also been involved in the development of viral vectors for gene therapy and gene transfer. So I haven't had any direct experience with poxviruses, but I've got a reasonable overall understanding of the virology field. So hopefully I can bring something to the discussion today.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And we're hoping to have Terry with us. And Terry has public health experience working in Africa and dealing directly with monkeypox outbreaks and so on. And so hopefully when he joins us, he'll give us another insight into what exactly we normally see and what could go on. Now, Chris, I think that probably it's wise for people to have a general understanding about viruses, because there is a lot of confusion out there, and it would probably be very valuable to hear a simple concept as to what are viruses, what do they do?
Sure, yeah. This is something that I do quite a lot, obviously, as my day job. Yes, when Philip asked me to give an overview of viral infections, I immediately thought, grief, where does one start? It's such a big area, but okay. I also thought, actually, how much of an introduction we need to give, because, of course, we've all been learning far more about viruses over the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic. We're all used to talking about certain things and using phrases and words which a lot of people have never heard of before, but they just sort of trip off the tongue now just because we're hearing it on the news and things like that. We have a far better understanding, which really can't be a bad thing. But certainly, yes, what I'll do is that I'll give some background on viruses and virus infections, which hopefully will lead into our discussion about monkeypox. I'll also pose some questions, which I think we will discuss afterwards as well. Of course, it's easy to ask the questions. That's the easy bit. The more difficult bit, of course, is actually providing answers to those questions. Okay, so I'm sure you're aware viruses can cause infections in all body systems, just like many other types of infectious agents, like bacteria, fungi, protozoa, that sort of thing, etc. A definition of a virus, just to sort of, so we know what they are, definition I normally give my students is this: they are obligate intracellular parasites whose genetic material, consisting of either DNA or RNA, is packaged into a protective coat and transmitted from one host cell to another. So viruses are not cells, so they're not really organisms. And therefore they don't replicate like organisms. They don't replicate by binary fission like bacteria or yeast do, or they don't replicate by sexual reproduction as we know it. They infect and take control of a cell in order to replicate themselves, leading to the production of hundreds and sometimes thousands of progeny viruses from each host cell, assembling new viruses from components, a bit like building a model out of Lego bricks. So it's not surprising then that some viruses can replicate and spread very fast. Even though they don't undergo sexual reproduction as we understand it, of course they can still exchange genetic material that can bestow upon them new characteristics and fuel their evolution. Of all infectious agents, viruses have the greatest variety in their morphology and their genomes. Our genome, of course, as you're all aware, I'm sure, is made up of double-stranded DNA. Of course, viruses can also have double-stranded DNA. They can also have single-stranded DNA, double-stranded or single-stranded RNA, so it's chemically different. Viruses that package one of the two strands, or viruses that package the other of the two strands. Viruses that package their genome in one piece. Viruses which use multiple pieces of their genetic material, sort of chopping up their genomes into things that are into units that are sort of in some regard analogous to chromosomes. So it's very complicated. There's huge variety in the way that viruses function. So when genomes replicate, it's possible, of course, for mistakes to occur in the sequence of bases that make up those genomes as they're copied. And of course, these are mutations, and we've heard a lot about those in the last few years. RNA viruses, such as influenza, HIV, or even SARS-CoV-2, make many more of these mistakes than DNA viruses do when they replicate, which allows for rapid evolution. Now, of course, since monkeypox is a DNA virus, however, it's less likely to change so rapidly. Viruses don't necessarily need to cause symptoms of disease. Of course, we always associate them with causing disease, but they may not necessarily have to do that. Of course, sometimes symptoms do facilitate their transmission, in which case there's, of course, a selective pressure to cause some level of pathology, although, of course, not to cause so much pathology as to actually kill their host before the virus has an opportunity to replicate and escape to a new host. Viruses survive in the population by transmission to new hosts, but there's always a survival advantage to be able to persist in an alternative host species. Eradication of smallpox was, of course, a mammoth task, but made all the easier by there not being an animal reservoir. It only infected humans. There are animal reservoirs of monkeypox in Africa, and of course the concern is that monkeypox could establish animal reservoirs in other parts of the world, making control considerably more difficult. Many viruses persist in individual hosts despite our efforts to eradicate them. Some viruses, such as cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus, varicella zoster, are able to persist asymptomatically in a large proportion of individuals. On occasions, viruses shed, allowing infection of others. As we've seen with COVID-19, however, this asymptomatic shedding is an issue when this leads to more vulnerable people becoming infected. Viruses can persist in us by a number of means, but often by reducing their visibility to our immune system that, of course, has evolved to eradicate such invaders when detected. What about diagnosis of viral infections? Well, I'm sure that you're aware from COVID-19 that we have a number of different technologies available for detecting viral infections. But of course, we have to identify the people to attempt detection in. If you have obvious monkeypox symptoms, you're more likely to get tested for a monkeypox infection. although of course there could be sensitivities around monkeypox since recent cases outside Africa have been associated with sexual contacts. Only those with obvious symptoms are likely to present for testing. If you don't have symptoms or only very mild symptoms, you're less likely to get tested and have that infection detected. Furthermore, if you don't have symptoms or only mild ones, you are much more likely to transmit the infection because you're not aware that you've got it, and therefore you're not aware that you're a risk to others. Could there be a lot more infection out there? And could there be a lot more transmission out there than we are currently aware of? We can control virus diseases in similar ways to other infectious agents. 3 ways really, namely by controlling exposure to the agent, increasing our resistance to succumb to infection by the use of vaccines, and by the use of anti-infective drugs, in this case antivirals. Of course, we've been thinking about all of those approaches amid the COVID pandemic, so we're very familiar with this. Controlling exposure to the pathogen is difficult, of course, if we're not certain of the possible routes of transmission. We may have a basic understanding, but there may other routes may be involved as well. It's also difficult where transmission of, if we're not sure where the infection is actually coming from, who is actually likely to be shedding the pathogen. The routes of transmission of viruses are, of course, the same for any other type of infectious agent. You'll be aware some infections are airborne, some are transmitted by aerosol droplets, some by direct contact, and so on and so forth. There are various means. The route of transmission, of course, is largely determined by where in the body infectious virus is, the quantity of the virus shed, and the level of susceptibility of the virus to the external environment. Some routes of transmission are much easier to control than others. Some infectious agents are airborne, which of course we know is very difficult to control, as we've experienced with COVID-19. Some infections require closer contact, and of course some infections require intimate contact. But how well do we understand the risk of infection of monkeypox? How closely do we have to come into contact with infected people or fomites in order to be infected? How certain can we be how certain can we be that we can easily identify infected people? Infections transmitted by semen, for example, can be prevented by the use of condoms, but transmission of monkeypox cannot be prevented that way, even if it is detected in semen. I'm not aware it has been, but it's always possible. Control of monkeypox will not be so easy, unfortunately. My understanding is that monkeypox infection outside Africa is predominantly in men that have sex with men and bisexual men. If we are seeing it in bisexual men, then we should expect more women to become infected. Some viruses, such as rubella, cytomegalovirus, and Zika virus, can cause fetal infection. As numbers of monkeypox cases in women rise, we would expect to see more infection in pregnant women. So what effect could that have on the mother and on the developing fetus? Currently, we know very little about this. We know that we can develop vaccines against viruses. Indeed, we've had much more success developing vaccines against viruses than any other type of infectious agent. Smallpox vaccines would have protected us from monkeypox infection, but of course, since smallpox has been eradicated, we no longer immunize against it. Nowadays, the vast majority of people are likely to be susceptible to monkeypox infection. There were some safety issues with the vaccine used to eradicate smallpox, but a safer version based on the Ankyras strain has been licensed in 2019 and is likely to be used for ring vaccination. Some viral infections can also be controlled by the use of antiviral drugs. However, of course, the intimate relationship between viruses and their host cells makes the development of antiviral drugs challenging. It's difficult to identify compounds that are toxic for virus-infected cells, but not for uninfected cells. Traditionally, antiviral drugs target virus-specific functions, such as nucleic acid replication or transcription, or protease function. The drug tecovirimat has been demonstrated to be safe and active against poxviruses, including monkeypox. It prevents progeny viruses from leaving infected cells, hindering the spread of virus within the body. In this regard, its mode of action is similar to that of the neuraminidase inhibitors for influenza viruses. If these monkeypox outbreaks cannot be controlled, will there be a need to develop new drugs? Well, poxviruses such as monkeypox are unusual for DNA viruses because they don't replicate in the nucleus of infected cells, which means that they have to carry and encode their own DNA and RNA synthesis factors that normally reside in the cell's nucleus. Hopefully, with that in mind, hopefully there will be numerous potential targets for future antiviral drug development. Hopefully, Philip, that's a good introduction.
Well, that's a comprehensive overview, Chris. Goodness. So, I mean, wow. So that's very valuable, Chris. So within that, I think that probably, now that you've done that very comprehensive overview of viruses, you've brought in some of the questions about monkeypox. This is where the kind of very practical, more detailed bit about monkeypox comes in, Grant. What is so unique about monkeypox, and why has it not become as prevalent as or as dangerous as, say, smallpox was historically?
So, by the way, Theory was trying to join for some reason.
Yes, I know. Don't worry. As soon as he comes back in, I'll get him on.
Okay. So, monkeypox is a virus. It's interesting. The term monkeypox means both the virus and the disease. So it's different than COVID, where COVID is the disease and SARS-CoV-2 is the virus. But often we use the same word to describe the virus and the disease, and I'll try and kind of distinguish the two as I discuss it. But both monkeypox and smallpox are poxviruses. They can infect humans. Smallpox can only infect humans and can only be transmitted from human to human. That's one of its unique features. There's no animal reservoir of smallpox virus. Monkeypox, on the other hand, is a rodent virus, mostly located in Africa, Central Africa and West Africa. And in those rodents, it is not a severe pathogen. But when humans come into contact with those rodents, and by contact, I mean direct physical contact, such as butchering them or eating them as bushmeat or having them in close physical contact, it's possible for the virus to be transmitted from the rodent to humans. When humans get this virus, the monkeypox virus, they can come down with a disease that resembles strongly smallpox. It's not identical, but there's a very close resemblance. The big difference between the two of them is that smallpox is fairly contagious and can be transmitted through the air, although not far through the air. It does require some kind of contact. But smallpox has a mortality of about 30 to 35% in the human population. Monkeypox and is quite good at being transmitted human to human. Monkeypox, on the other hand, has a lower mortality. The Central African variant in Central Africa has a mortality rate of about 10%. And the West African strain has a mortality in West Africa of about 3 to 4%. But the big difference between them is that monkeypox in humans traditionally in the past has tended to stop when the first person got the disease. It was difficult for that person to transmit it to another person. The attack rate in Africa, for example, or in our experience in the past when the virus has gotten outside of Africa, is about 10%. So the R naught, or the ability of the virus to spread from human to human of monkeypox is quite low normally, whereas smallpox, it's much higher. And so smallpox can and did spread through the human population around the world until it was eradicated by the worldwide vaccination program. So we know a fair bit about the primary monkeypox disease. What seems to be new right now is how it's being transmitted outside of Africa. And there we have a number of questions and a number of things we don't understand yet.
That's quite useful. We're having a few internet connections with Terry. Terry, are you able to hear us at the moment?
Yes, I can hear you, but I'm not sure to to be with you until the end of this live. So
No, don't
first of
worry.
all, I
Don't
want
worry.
to say hi to everybody.
Yes, I think you're having some internet connections. Is that we can hear you, Terry. So, Terry, whilst we are hearing you, because
Yeah,
I
can you
know
hear
that
me?
I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you. And so we can't see you, but that's okay. So, Terry, if you don't mind, we just had Chris do an overview of viruses, Grant do a basics of the virology of monkeypox. Are you able to talk about some of your experience in terms of Congo directly with monkeypox?
Yes, it's possible. So what I can say is we are facing monkeypox since 1970 in this country because the first human case was detected here in Basankusu, and since that date we first monkeypox here. But we noticed from from 19 from 1996, after the big outbreak in DRC, it was in Sanku, one of the hotspots of the country. From that date, the diseases spread in several regions or several provinces in our country. Like now, currently, we have every years on average 200 cases in the country, and over over 26 provinces, we have 18 who are which are epidemics, and annually we have cases. And about what we are talking about, the virology. I'm not virologist, I'm epidemiologist, but what I can say, epidemiological saying, dealing with monkeypox in our setting are quite difficult.
What do you mean by that, Terry? When you say it's quite difficult, is it because of resources? Are you hearing us, Terry? He'll hopefully jump back in again, Grant. So what he was talking about there, Grant, are you able to expand on a little bit of the issues? Is that a resource problem for the Congo that they're struggling with, or is it just the disease itself?
So there's a resource issue because it is a non-trivial business to have a definitive diagnosis of monkeypox. And the resources of the ability to do that, other than a clinical diagnosis, is probably more restricted in Central Africa. But I think the point he's making is that over the years, the number of monkeypox cases in the Congo has been ticking up gradually. And people have wondered, why is that? Is the interaction of people with rodents changed? And it's possible that is part of the answer. In other words, there's more contact between people and infected rodents. That's possible. But the other thing that's been speculated is that the fraction of people that are vaccinated against smallpox is dropping with every year, because routine smallpox vaccination stopped decades ago. And with each passing year, as new people are born and are not vaccinated, the cohort of what we call unvaccinated people that can be infected by the virus are growing progressively with each year. So it's possible it's simply a reflection of movement of human people in contact with virus in combination with an increased number of the people who have no previous smallpox vaccination that would protect them.
Any thoughts on what you've just heard, Chris?
Well, I was thinking about what Grant was saying earlier about transmission from rodents, and you seem to suggest that you really do need pretty close contact like you were saying about, cooking them and, using it as bushmeat. I mean, is it possible to just to sort of, walk on the same patch of ground, say, as, an infected rodent and catch it that way? Or is that not close enough?
It might be, because you remember the hantavirus outbreaks came about from breathing basically dried feces from rodents. So going through, let's say, a building in which a lot of rodents bearing the virus had defecated and their defecations had desiccated out, it could be aerosolized simply by walking through it, and you could come into respiratory contact with the virus. So it's entirely possible that some of the transmission from rodents to people isn't by direct contact. It can be with respiratory intake of material that came from infected rodents.
Now, one of the things that is concerning me, and I think that both of you guys who have a lot of experience from the scientific point of view, is that there is a vacuum with regards to information around monkeypox. We are hearing patchy stories. The news is almost discounting it. I mean, it was initially a big thing in the first week. I think the first case was on the 7th of May. We are now on the 27th of May. So within 20 days, we have probably over 300 cases scattered across Europe, North America, Australia. Is this normal? Are you surprised by this, any of you guys?
Well, maybe I'll start. The presentation of the disease in people, as it's described, looks fairly, I would say, typical of monkeypox. There is what we call a draft genome of some of the isolates of people that have been infected in Europe. And it looks to be pretty normal West African clade of monkeypox. So as best as I can tell, there's nothing that's changed dramatically in the virus. What has changed is the transmission pattern, the epidemiology, where the virus cases are popping up. So this is clearly a case where contact tracers and epidemiologists are needed to tell us what is the chain of events that led to the cases as they were diagnosed. Is it strictly a sexual connection, which could be heterosexual or gay? It can be either. Or is there something unexpected going on? We don't know the answer to that right now. I suspect, based on what I see, is that the transmission still requires very close contact. But what has changed is some of the contactees may be world travelers. They can hop on a plane, they can go to another country, and if they have multiple sexual partners, then you can imagine the chain of events being apparently discontinuous from the outside, but in fact is still kind of following the rules of close human contact resulting in human-to-human transmission, but you still require close human contact to continue the chain.
And so my question, go ahead, Chris, actually, before I ask, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I agree with Grant. It's pretty convincingly monkeypox. And it's just why it's appearing in those, where we're not expecting it. There's got to be some reason for that. But it's certainly monkeypox. And as Grant said, it doesn't look as if it's an unusual strain either. It looks very much like the West African strain, and so obviously people will always think, has it changed? Has it become it's undergone some collection of mutations which is making it pop up where we're not expecting it or something? It all looks pretty normal, doesn't it, Grant? I think from what we know. So yes, I'm sure it's a question of the epidemiology. Why is it appearing there?
I mean, for example, we still have more things to learn about what is the probability of the different ways the virus can be transmitted human to human. So it appears that sexual contact can facilitate a transmission. That's really not unexpected, and it makes perfect sense. But there are other questions. For example, it's been reported that the virus can be spread in large respiratory droplets, which means if you get very close to someone talking to you and you inhale larger respiratory droplets, then it can be transmitted by that method. But if that's true, that also suggests the virus can be in saliva. And that can be another route of transmission from human to human that we hadn't appreciated before. Exchange of saliva can happen, of course, during sexual conduct, but even by family kissing, for example. So there's much more we have to learn, but it still looks like close human contact is required to keep that chain of transmission from human to human to happen. There's no evidence that fundamental barrier has changed.
And so it seems as though, and this is why I'm saying the information is sketchy. And when you have a situation where information is not open, it tends to fuel conspiracies, so to speak. And so one of the questions that I still don't know the answer for, but I am presuming, is that the majority of people are men. And as far as I've heard, there have been no women who have been infected as yet. Is that in itself strange? Because I assume monkeypox is not a male predominant disease in the Congo.
It's also not male predominant in previous outbreaks of this virus outside of Africa. And as far as I know, in Africa, it can attack men and women pretty much equally. But we do have some experience of the virus when it appeared in the United States in 2003. So there was an accidental importation of rodents from West Africa into middle of America, into the Chicago district, importation of a number of different rodents from Africa. And it so happened that that virus from that shipment got into about 100 people in the Midwest of the United States. And one of the things we learned during that little mini outbreak, because it didn't extend beyond those 100 or so cases, is that men and women both got it, but it was poorly transmitted human to human, in part because the people who had acquired it, I would say, were not sexually promiscuous, as best as anyone could tell. These were family units and individuals. And we also learned from that outbreak that previous vaccination of smallpox did provide protection against monkeypox disease. So people that were previously smallpox vaccinated tend to have smaller numbers of lesions or no lesions at all. So we've learned a couple things from that. And what I can probably surmise from the current outbreak is, although they're currently being reported in men, it's probably because the men have appeared in clinics and gotten diagnosed sooner, because very few physicians were thinking of monkeypox a month ago when looking at lesions in sexually active adults. There wasn't a reason to make that connection. But now the connection is being made, and physicians and public health people and the public should pay more attention. Are there women out there that have monkeypox lesions? Because there's no biologic reason it should be restricted to men, other than the fact if men who have sex with men have more sex partners, they will have more contacts.
And so parents may be worried in terms of children. I guess, therefore, children are just as at risk as adults. So the fact that, again, it is concentrated in one group, you're right, it could be purely epidemiological and purely contact related. But is therefore, if it continues to spread, just a matter of time before it has the heterosexual or even direct contact between children and adults in a household where people have closer contact? Would you expect, therefore, that eventually children would start having symptoms?
Well, the experience in the 2003 outbreak in the US is that some children did get it in households in which the mother or the father or both had gotten it. And so if the virus should extend more widely and get into family groups, yes, the public health people need to pay attention, because anyone can get it through close contact. It's not just sexual. Close physical contact that happens in families can spread the virus within families. So we do want to nip this in the bud. We do not want to see widespread propagation of this virus in humans. We want to stamp it out. The sooner we do, the better. But fortunately, the tools to do that are pretty good right now.
Chris, I wanted, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to ask, two things I mentioned in my presentation. One was asymptomatic spread. Are you aware of any evidence of it being transmitted asymptomatically?
I'm aware of people in that 2003 outbreak who were serologically examined because they were part of the local groups where the monkeypox was found. Some of them, in particular, previously vaccinated people, had clear conversion to, in other words, were infected by the virus but had no symptoms whatsoever. So people that were previously vaccinated could be infected without knowing it. But what we don't know is, have any of those people transmitted it onward? Yeah. It's possible they didn't. Yes. And my guess is they probably didn't, but we don't know that positively for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds from what you said before that actually monkeypox is quite difficult to pass between people. Yeah. But I think as soon as people start talking about, associated with sexual activity, that people immediately think, is it a sexually transmitted virus? Is it transmitted in semen or vaginal fluids or so? I mean, are you aware of any studies where they've looked at transmission that way?
Well, now that people are paying attention to it, there will be studies looking to see if it's in semen. Is it in vaginal secretions, for example? We don't know the answer to that right now. We guess it could be in saliva. That would be my best guess based on what we know. But other than that, we don't really understand where the largest reservoir of virus is other than lesions. We do know that a monkeypox lesion has infectious virus for a goodly period of time. For as long as the lesion is there, there's probably infectious virus there that can be transmitted by contact. So we do know that for sure. And it's always been imagined that that's the major route of human-to-human transmission is from material, virus material from the lesions. But our knowledge is much murkier when it comes to sexual fluids, for example. But we have that answer. People will be looking at it, and we should be able to determine if there's any infectious virus, for example, in semen. We're going to know that at some point in the not too distant future.
Is that known for smallpox?
Sorry?
Is that known for smallpox? Was there any evidence of transmission, sexual transmission with smallpox?
Well, it's always hard to tell with smallpox because it was quite infectious and there are many different ways that happened. So if a husband gave it to a wife, for example, there was no way to really know if it was in semen or just other secretions or just through droplets, respiratory droplets. It was hard to know.
I know your time is limited, Grant, and so one important question I wanted to ask you about was this concept of co-infections. So, and this is where I wished I had Thierry, because he was talking about that as well, where they have been struggling with the fact that up to 12% of cases, when they looked retrospectively, were combinations of monkeypox and the varicella zoster virus. And they couldn't explain how the two worked together, but it did seem that they were helping each other. What's that about?
So we don't understand everything about co-infections, but there's a couple things we do know. Co-infections that involve lesions, in other words, involve breaks in the skin, will facilitate the spread of a virus like monkeypox. So anything that abrades the skin, and that can be scratches, but it can also be lesions from other infections, and that could include herpes. It could include syphilis, for example. So the likelihood of monkeypox gaining entrance into a recipient will go up if they've got skin lesions caused by something else. So that I think is fairly understandable. But in addition to that, multiple infections often can change the immune response. An infection by one virus can alter the immune system, can weaken it, or in some cases can activate it. But that can change the immune environment that the second pathogen, in this case, monkeypox, would see. So you can imagine that not only are there physical changes where a co-infection will make it more likely that monkeypox will infect, but also immune changes can also facilitate that as well. So we don't really know the exact answer, but there's a number of reasonable explanations of why co-infections can result in a greater amount of infection by monkeypox.
Here's a question for Chris along that line, Chris, is because when I first saw the cases, the thing that stood out to me was that one of the patients had presented in a sexually transmitted diseases clinic, and the presumption at the time was that it was herpes, I think, until they started to get trunk lesions and so on. So my question is now purely along the line of, if you can have a co-infection with varicella zoster, which is part of the herpes group, is it at all feasible that you can have herpes simplex 1 or 2 having co-infections with monkeypox? And that could, in my mind, explain some of the increased genital transmission that we seem to be having. Was that a reasonable thought?
Well, I don't see why not. I mean, why you couldn't get a. I mean, I asked a question of Thierry this a couple of days ago, actually, but I'm not sure if he replied or his reply. I didn't quite understand his reply, but I was asking whether he had any evidence of co-infections. And I think it was co-infections between monkeypox and varicella zoster, because. And in his answer, he was talking about varicella zoster, but I couldn't quite understand whether it was a co-infection or whether there was some misdiagnosis, whether there was confusion as to whether. I think I got the impression that he was saying that there's there's quite a lot of confusion between chickenpox and monkeypox. I guess you probably don't see it so much. It wouldn't be so much of a problem certainly in the UK or other countries of the world that immunise against varicella zoster, or they get, you tend to get varicella as a child, so you'd be immune from that. But I can see it could be an issue in terms of diagnosis. If you think you've got one, you don't think about the other. But that's different, of course, from actually getting a co-infection. But I don't see why you couldn't. But who knows? As Grant was saying, infections with one can exacerbate another infection, or in fact can sort of lead to some level of protection. It's a sort of a complication, isn't it? So I don't know what the evidence is that you can actually get both. But I would have thought in theory you could.
The other virus that is relevant to that, of course, is HIV. So people that have HIV have disturbances in their immune system, particularly their lymphocytic system. And so if an HIV-infected person, even if the virus is under control with drugs, has a dysregulated T cell system, then you can imagine that such people might be under higher risk from the disease of monkeypox as well, because we require our immune system to recognize monkeypox and to clear it. And so we need a healthy immune system to do that.
It would be interesting to know, wouldn't it, what these patients that have monkeypox, what else they've got going on.
This is what I'm saying with all the information.
Do they have CMV?
Yes,
EBV,
absolutely. And I think that the fact that we don't have clarity, I know that people are trying to not make people worried, but in the process, you end up with a situation where then becomes a lot of speculation as to why. Say, for instance, it's leading me into the other important question, which there's speculation about. Nobody has said whether or not this group is vaccinated. Now, people may say it's irrelevant, but to me, it should be a simple question. Is it 10%? Is it 50%? Is it 100%? If it is 100%, is it relevant? We don't know. So here is the question I'd come back to again for Grant. you mentioned the fact that there is some in HIV, say if you have immune dysregulation, there would be increased risk. The question is in the context of vaccination, if you also have immune dysregulation after, say, a booster, could you therefore, in theory, be more susceptible to another virus? Is that unreasonable?
Well, remember that all of us are multiply vaccinated for many infectious diseases since we were children. And so all of us have been multiply vaccinated with multiple different types of vaccines. And as more and more people get vaccinated, we learn more and more about potential complications. So, for example, measles vaccination is widespread around the world, and we know a fair bit about the consequences of measles vaccination. And complications like increased susceptibility to other diseases have not been noted in response to the vaccination, although they have been noted to the disease. So what I would say is, based on what we know right now, there's not an obvious connection between the spread of monkeypox that we see right now and any alterations in vaccination or any red flags that we can put up to any other kind of vaccination at the moment. The point is well taken that the immune landscape of an individual person is utterly critical to how the disease progresses, whether or not we control it or whether it's a minor disease. So the issue of what is going on with the immune system is always important and critical. But right now, I do not see any particular link with any other vaccine and this rise of smallpox that we're seeing in Europe and North America.
So before you run out of time, Grant, I'll be able to talk to Chris a little bit longer. But in terms of, therefore, when you look at where we are now, say, for instance, there are about 300 cases across the world. What's your threshold to say, oh my God, we have got a problem here? And what is your biggest concern that can occur out of this?
Right. So at the moment, I would say on the fear meter, my fear is quite low in terms of public health for the current status. The drugs and the vaccines and the public health methods we have to address this are very good. And I'm expecting us to bring this under control. However, it's also likely there are cases that have not been diagnosed, could be in males and females, and the number of cases outside of Africa is larger than we appreciate right now, and it's harder to bring it under control. That's entirely possible. I'm quite hopeful, but you have to acknowledge that there may be more cases out there than we appreciate right now, and it will require a greater effort to bring it all under control. So I have relatively low fears about that, the ability for us to control the current outbreak as I see it right now. My biggest fear is that the virus could get out into a wild rodent population outside of Africa. We know, for example, in the United States, that the virus replicates very well in prairie dogs. And in fact, it was spread in the 2003 outbreak by infected prairie dogs who got it from infected African rodents. It turned out that those prairie dogs never went wild, the virus never got out, and so everyone kind of breathed a sigh of relief. But we don't want to see that happen. And that's true in Europe, in Australia, in North America. We don't want the virus to get enzootic in any animal population that is new. So that's another reason, not only for public health of the people who have the virus to bring it under control, but also because we want to nip this in the bud so that it doesn't become a long-term chronic problem, at least in any place new.
Yeah, tremendous. And so what would your advice be then, Grant, before you have to jump? What would your advice then be if you were then speaking to the WHO, which you have done in the past, or any of your major public health organizations? What would you be saying to them?
So the World Health Organization and the major public health services that I'm aware of in the West, understand this problem very well. They know about the drugs, they know about public health measures, and my only advice would be to increase the word, spread the word amongst hospitals, doctors, nurses, public health people, to be aware of what looks to be sexually transmitted lesions that look atypical, to pay close attention to identify them and think of the possibility that it could be this virus and it should be addressed right away. But other than that, the WHO knows this disease very well, knows the countermeasures, and the recommendations they will make to their partner countries will be inevitably sound and well taken.
Excellent. Tremendous, tremendous. Thank you very much, Grant. I mean, I'll continue to talk to Chris for a little bit longer, but we really appreciate your expertise and your time. The reassuring, calm attitude does make one feel a lot more relaxed.
All right. Thank you very much. It was my pleasure, and I'm happy to talk to you again.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Grant. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
So Chris, then, as we one of the things that I have learned when I look at what happened with COVID-19 is that the messaging didn't seem to be as good as it could. Is there anything we can learn from that experience?
Well, it's still, as far as monkeypox is concerned, it's still pretty early on, isn't it, really? We haven't, like you say, it's only been the sort of beginning of the month that we started seeing these. So, I think it's just that things take time for us to sort of get to understand what's going on and what we should be looking for, and I honestly don't think anything's been covered up here. I think it's just that it's new, and that the longer this goes on, and hopefully it won't go on very long, but the longer it does, the more understanding we'll have, the more information we will have, the more testing. As I said, I think we need to know more about what's going on in these particular patients. We may know they've got monkeypox, but what else is going on that could be could explain why they're getting it. But yeah, I think it's just new. I don't think it's anything is being kept from us. I think it's just we don't have the information.
Yeah. So one of the things I appreciated when the beginning of COVID, and it's one of the things that, whilst we may argue about some of the things the Chinese would do, one of the things that they were exceptionally good at was sharing data. They were able to put out just raw data about patients, backgrounds, comorbidities, age, that can then be analyzed and looked at objectively. This is something that beyond that we have been very poor at in the Western world, is that we keep on worrying about people's interpretation of data, and so therefore we put data away. I'm worried that the same thing could happen here, because there could be valuable concepts that come out from just seeing the data, from seeing the patterns. There could be some important concepts that we pick up on. Any thoughts? Yeah.
I'm sure everyone wants to know what's going on here, wants to get to the bottom of this. I don't think this is being hidden away. So I think it will come out in time. That I said, I'm sure there are people looking at this and thinking, scratching their heads and thinking, why is this happening? It's an obvious question to ask. But I honestly don't think anything is being sort of kept away from public consumption. I really don't. I don't think that's in anyone's interest to do, and I don't see why that should be the case.
One other question. So I've mentioned the issue about vaccines, which we've answered. We kind of can ask about COVID, but we can't necessarily see how there could be a direct link with COVID itself. But one of the other questions that we haven't touched on is the potential of something like bioterrorism. Is that even feasible?
Well, I suppose it's always a possibility, but I'm not. I wouldn't have thought it was very likely. Monkeypox is, as Grant said, it's not easily transmitted. if it had been, we would be seeing a lot more cases now. So I find it hard to believe that someone would select monkeypox if they wanted to do put a
Yeah.
cat amongst the pigeons, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you're going to pick one,
Yeah.
don't pick monkeypox. Yes, that's a very, very good point. You know, that is a reassuring perspective. So I'd ask Grant this question, and as we come to the end now, Chris, I'll ask you one of those questions and your closing thoughts. But in terms of flags, in terms of what is your flag in your mind that makes you think, oh my goodness, if this were to happen, I would get really concerned. What would be your red flag?
Well, it's a difficult one. You put me on the spot now. I mean, I think Grant's point of you know, if it gets into an animal population, that is a concern, because then that makes it very difficult to control. Of course, there's lots of concern about, well, there's enough concern about the SARS-CoV-2 going around the human population, but the fact that that is well established in animal populations means that that's going to be, you know, even if we could eradicate it from the human population, it could always pop back in again from an animal source. So that is a real concern. We do need to find out what's going on here, why these people are getting it where frankly we wouldn't expect them to get it. We do need to understand that, but I'm not overly concerned that it is something that's going to spread too far. I mean, it's understandable that people are going to think, is this going to be another COVID? It's not going to be another COVID. It's not, you know, it isn't that easily transmitted. Now, okay, at the beginning of COVID, we just from experience with the original SARS infection, we assumed that it was just transmitted by people who had severe disease. And clearly with COVID, that turned out not to be the case. We may, as with the fullness of time, we may find out that there is asymptomatic spread, but it's not a nice disease to get. I agree, and it's disfiguring, and it's, you know, but it's not that serious. My understanding is that even though, you know, there is a 10% case fatality rate of the worst of the two clades in Africa, that part of that fatality is because of medical resources.
Yes.
You know, even if you got people outside that area getting that clade, I suspect the mortality would be a lot lower. So I'm not overly concerned, but we do need to find out what is going on.
Absolutely.
So it's concerning to do that, but I'm not overly concerned that it's going to, you know, wipe through the human population.
Excellent. And so as we come to the end, Chris, I really appreciate your input. Any final takeaway thoughts about the importance of virology as more and more people are starting to realize that this is actually a really important area that needs study, that needs research, that needs resources?
Well, we've seen with COVID, seen the impact that it can have. Even before this monkeypox, there's these cases of acute hepatitis that we're seeing, that we're still investigating. And from what I've seen anyway, we're still not much further on in our understanding of what is going on there. But these virus infections keep popping up, don't they? And we do need to find out more about what is going on.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. And thank you everyone for listening with us. As I can promise you, we're bringing some of the best minds and thinkers together to discuss really innovative concepts, really innovative ideas. Really appreciate that you've listened with us today, and look out for more presentations in the near future. Have a great day to everyone, and we'll certainly be bringing more stuff for you very soon. Sorry. Thank you very much. So I just realized that one of the people that I had wanted to have involved in the discussion at the time, he couldn't join us at the time. And so we finished off the discussion, and I'll quickly add him into our discussion now, and that is Professor Chris Newton. Thank you, Chris. I've just unmuted you at the
Pleasure.
moment. So, thank you
Hi.
for joining us, Chris. And
Pleasure.
it would have been great to have heard your perspectives with everybody, but I thought it would still be a great idea to have you get some ideas in, and I'll take the positions from some of the things they said. So, if you just don't mind just doing a quick introduction of yourself.
Right. I suppose I got involved in 2020 looking into COVID, mainly because I couldn't believe what was happening, and I wanted to try and contribute to make it stop. And so I guess most of us sort of carried on in that way, and we sort of became expert is not the right term, but we did a lot of work and to try and understand what was going on. My basic background was not virology; it was molecular biology. So I come at these things really as a somewhat educated layperson. Let's put it that way. So I mean, I followed the COVID story all the way through. I'm still waiting for a publication, a review article to be published. And my main interest for COVID was therapy, but in terms of early therapy, in particular, a nutritional approach. But of course, one of my heroes is Shankara Chetty, and I have to say that because he's done some absolutely tremendous work, and he's really pinpointed the fact that COVID is not so much about a virus; it's about a protein, and that's the spike protein. And I think this is forgotten to a great extent. And then of course we use the spike protein to vaccinate, which is in some ways not so clever. That I think there are some problems. We come on to that maybe, but so I've just followed the COVID story based on what's gone before in terms of my knowledge of molecular biology. I have very little grounding in virology. I've had to come at this through a very sort of nuts and bolts approach. So monkeypox is not something that I plan to do any investigation of at all. I was, in fact, it's not until this week that I've started to look at it because I've just ignored it. I thought, well, there are so few cases. Basically, this is nonsense. I have to say that because it does seem nonsense to a lay person. Perhaps if you're a virologist, as your guest or the guest you had on just now, it's a different matter. But to somebody that comes at it first thing, fresh, then it just seems crazy. Why now are we seeing cases? And I think it's a case of if you look, you will find. Why do you look? I don't know the history of these people that ended up at these clinics. If that was the kickoff. So if they attended a sexual clinic of some sort, why and how did they make a diagnosis of monkeypox? Was it based on the clinical picture? Surely we didn't have any genomic sequencing a month ago. Why would we? And maybe I'll just stop there because I'm sure you want to ask me the next question.
Yeah, well, I think the point is, from a practical point of view, one of the things that disturbs me is that we don't have enough details. And speculation always causes problems. Now, based on what I have read, it seems as though the early presentations were in a sexually transmitted disease clinic. It looked more like herpes, genital lesions.
Yeah.
And then you started to have trunk lesions. And therefore, once you start having the trunk lesions, that doesn't fit with a herpes infection. And I think it was from that clinical perspective that eventually it went towards monkeypox. What I suspect we may find is that there were earlier cases possibly that were treated as something else, but in retrospect you may find that these were actually monkeypox, so our numbers could increase over time. But yes, you've asked the question that I was asking the guests, which is why now? You know, is it just coincidental? Because we have had monkeypox in the UK in 2018, but it was only about 3 or 4 cases. So why now?
I was shocked on Monday, I must admit. I came across this document, and it's the Nuclear Threat Initiative. And it was a group of people at the Munich Security Conference in March 2021, and they were exploring a scenario. And bearing in mind, we've had a similar exploration of a scenario for COVID. Now, okay, it sounds conspiratorial, but I have to go there. We had that in 2019, Event 201, and it was exploring a scenario for a coronavirus outbreak and a pandemic. And lo and behold, in this paper, we have an exercise scenario. So, and bearing in mind, this was published, when was it published? I think in November 2021, but the meeting took place in March 2021 in Munich. So, developed in consultation with technical and policy experts, the exercise scenario portrayed a deadly global pandemic involving an unusual strain of monkeypox virus that first emerges in the fictional country of whatever. So we have a timeline. We have, and the timeline, that this, people will have seen this, I'm sure, but you probably can't really read it there. But so the timeline: attack, May 15th, 2022. So, okay, right. So somebody thought monkeypox was a problem. Why May 2022? I have no idea. I cannot explain this. The WHO has talked about monkeypox as well. I think there was an article that appeared in November detailing discussions at the WHO. Now, okay, and this is my problem. I'm not a virologist, so I come at this as a layperson with some scientific knowledge background. Reading that, and it says a terrorist threat. Well, you know, monkeypox modifying the genome. We've heard from your previous talkers, people, that the genome is not modified, so it's not a bioweapon. But I don't know. But why now? And so, did these people have knowledge that something was going on? Has something been released that's not modified? I don't know. I have no idea how this could have happened. I mean, this has been picked up by many outlets. I mean, the Brownstone Institute has talked about this and talked about Event 201 as well. I'm completely puzzled. You know,
why now? Yes. Well, I didn't. I think I took the point that Professor Ring had said when he said, truthfully, if you're going to pick a bioterrorism virus, you know, why would you pick monkeypox? You'd probably be better off picking smallpox. You know, if you're going to do it properly. Now, And so in that respect, I think that that makes a lot of sense. So it may just be very, very random. However, the thing that got my attention, and this was what I was alluding to with regards to earlier in the discussion with them, is that my concern is that not that you have cases, because we've had a few outbreaks in different parts of the world, but this is within a period of 21 days, we have seen a global spread of this monkeypox, where, as somebody was saying, Mexico, I think Argentina is now affected, certainly Europe,
Yeah.
Australia. So travel is certainly a big part of it. But that in itself is a question. And this was one of the points that I was raising, is that the fact that travel is involved suggests, therefore, if you're going to question anything about whether or not vaccination is a combination with this, it suggests that the people who have got it have been vaccinated because they're traveling.
Yeah.
Additionally, they haven't said anything, and that I find very concerning, because I've said that if this group of people were unvaccinated, this would be all over the news. They would be saying that this group of people are unvaccinated. Now, what happens is that if it flips the other way, we don't talk about it, we don't even share the details. I'm not sure if that is necessarily good scientific practice.
No.
It may not be relevant, but you have got to look objectively at data.
You have. And of course, what we haven't got is we haven't got the breakdown. I do have to just sort of question the fact that, okay, we're all vaccinated, but we've never been vaccinated with these type of vaccines before.
So this is where the immunology comes in, and
Yeah.
that was the question that you had raised in a LinkedIn post with
Yes.
regards to the immunology
Yes.
around the
Yes.
technology that we're using.
Yes.
Can you explain from an immune point of view what you're talking about?
I think the key there is the modification. Well, it's in particular the mRNA vaccines. And the modifications, the pseudouridine modifications, designed to increase the lifespan of the mRNA. But those same modifications seem to, or the innate immune system seems not to see mRNA modified in that way. And that was one of the main reasons for using the pseudouridine modification. So you don't actually initiate an immune attack after vaccination. But I think the problem has been highlighted that you may actually be shutting down part of the innate immune system after the vaccine has been delivered. How long that extends for, I don't know. So why now? If, and you were saying about the co-infections, I mean, there is evidence. There is evidence for the papers published on herpes zoster, HHV6, HHV7, Epstein-Barr virus. These viruses are being unmasked, it seems, by, in particular, the mRNA vaccines. Now, we lack data. We completely lack data because the MHRA yellow card system is not specific enough. It cannot. It doesn't break down the side effect versus time from vaccination. Which number? How many is it the booster? I mean, how many boosters are people getting when these viruses break through? Now, as we know, with the chickenpox virus, the varicella virus will result in a latent form which can come through as shingles. Now, these articles are actually talking about shingles. So shingles is being unmasked, if you like. Shingles is coming through, it seems, in relation to the mRNA vaccination. Now, that is new. No population has been exposed at this level to an mRNA vaccine ever. So,
And so just to clarify, you're saying that this is not a pattern that you would expect to or even consider with regards to the adenovirus vector vaccines, so that those are approaching DNA as opposed to the RNA.
I think not. I think it's in particular the modification of the RNA that's used in the vaccine that is causing this, causing a sort of blinding of the immune system. Now, you say, well, surely that can't last a long time. Surely it's only whilst the mRNA is present. Well, yeah, I mean, that's something I don't understand. I just cannot understand how this can happen now. In particular, is it that people have had, the fourth vaccination, or the second booster, if you like, and is it after the second booster that people are now getting these problems? Are we actually unmasking a much bigger problem? And now this is going to sound completely conspiratorial. I apologize for that, but was this known? What is this a way of basically sort of? And I know Chris was saying that nothing is hidden. I don't entirely agree. I think an awful lot is hidden. It certainly is hidden to us, and it may well be that this is just the tip of the iceberg, that we will unmask an awful lot of latent viruses due to perhaps the mRNA, but this is where the data is lacking. We need to be able to break down the groups. We need to look at the unvaccinated groups. Now, I know that's difficult now, but you can look at me. I'm not vaccinated. I don't know how many of us unvaccinated now exist, but certainly we need to look at the mRNA versus the adenovirus vaccine for a start. We need to look at the VAERS data. We need to look at the European data. We need to look at the UK data. Now, this is where the MHRA is failing, because it's not critically looking at their own yellow card data and breaking it down and giving us the disease conditions that are developing versus the time of vaccination from the very first vaccine, second booster. We need those data.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, and I am completely in agreement with the need for open data that you can analyze. The problem has been is that there are political consequences that are affiliated with a degree of openness. And the problem is that science doesn't wait, meaning that viruses' immune systems are not dependent on politics. So if we miss something, we're going to therefore run into trouble down the line.
Yeah.
That's where I think I'm concerned. And so, as I had said before, the thing that struck me about monkeypox at the time was to do with the speed that it was moving through populations that are highly vaccinated.
Yeah.
And so this is why I said that the first bit of information that needs to be clarified is, out of the 250 or 300 cases that are across the world, what is their gender, what percentage have comorbidities. You don't have to say what they are, just the comorbidities, and critically, what percentage are vaccinated. Now, if you find that the majority are vaccinated, it still doesn't mean that it's relevant, but it does mean that you can't discount it. And you must therefore do the due diligence of going through that data to try and understand if there could be a link that we haven't thought of. That's my point from a scientific perspective, is that as science just turns the stone, you don't determine that stone should not be turned. Every stone is turned. And that's the perspective that I would say. And that's where we end up with problems with regards to the whole issue of breakdown of trust, increased speculation, lots of conspiracy theories.
Yeah. No, I entirely agree. It's just such a shame because, you know, if you're going to collect data, then do it properly and do it with the aim of going back and interrogating that data. And that's not happening. It's not happening in the States. It's not happening in Europe. It's not happening here. It seems that the data post-vaccination is just being left in the database. People are going into it. I mean, one of the best. I have to give them a heads up here because one of the best. They've built into the MHRA data a sort of data retrieval on their website is the UK column, and this is what the MHRA should have done. They should have made it much more accessible to interrogate their own database.
Yeah.
And they should be talking about their database. It's almost as if they've just sort of, oh, we've done our job and just leave it at that. You know, we don't need to ask any more questions. Yes, we do. We need to ask a hell of a lot of questions. This has never ever been done before on such a mass scale. You know, we've never used an mRNA vaccine in this way. We've not used adenovirus, yes, but not at this scale. But we need to know what the difference is between the two. So we need the three groups. We need the control group, which is difficult, I know. And we need the mRNA. We need the adenovirus group. And let's see what is coming out. Is it a problem? Is it really that we are going to see? How are we really uncovering an awful lot of latent viruses? They will come through based on the fact that the innate immune system is somewhat down. I mean, I was very, very confused by the data from the UK government where they were showing the number of cases. I think I haven't looked for a month or two now of vaccinated versus unvaccinated, and you know the cases certainly for COVID were much higher in the vaccinated than the unvaccinated, and there's all sorts of reasons given in the small print. I don't actually buy it. There was a huge difference. It ended up being about 4 to 5-fold greater in the sort of middle age groups, so from 30 onwards, than the unvaccinated. Well, so that does that say something about the innate immune system? Does that mean that somehow that but again we need to look at the type of vaccine given. Was it the mRNA? Was it the adenovirus vaccine? But that may say that the innate immune system in total is degrading somewhat, and that will be the thing that will allow the latent viruses to come through.
Can I ask you a question here that was put by Virginia? And she says the lipid LPS, I suspect the lipid nanoparticle surrounding the mRNA, does it affect the TLR4 and MAVs? I'm not sure what that is, antiviral signaling. Does that question make any sense?
I'm going to have to say I don't know.
Okay. I didn't know either.
Sorry. I don't know. I don't know.
Yes. And so if here's a question, that's another one that's on the part that if innate immunity is impaired, would you expect to see increased cancer rates and accelerated cancer?
I mean, there has been this link with spike protein. And spike protein seems to be able to get into the nucleus, and it's somehow degrading the ability of DNA repair mechanisms to operate. That's theoretical in a way. It's all lab-based stuff. But I mean, if you look at the general web, there does seem to be indications of increasing cancer rates. and this is so important. That this is the sort of surveillance that the organisations I've just mentioned should be looking for. They should be looking for increased cancer rates in association with the current vaccination regimes. We cannot afford not to do this. It's if we're, I mean, I remember early on people talking about mRNA vaccines, a fantastic thing, you know, a wonderful way of delivering a vaccine. Yes, it is scientifically. It's so much. I say so much more straightforward. It's more straightforward. Let's put it that way. You can do an awful lot with an mRNA delivery system. But as the person just asked here, you know, we've got to encapsulate that in a lipid nanoparticle. The lipid nanoparticles are not inert. They may and this may be where the connection with TLR4 comes in. Whether it's masking the TLR4 response, so these receptors are part of the innate immune system, the early warning system of the body. So it's possible, but the lipid nanoparticles may have toxicity in their own right, and they may be involved in some kind of immune dysregulation. I don't know for certain. I think so much of this is down to the basic research. You know, it's in the basic research articles. I think when it comes to the clinical side of things, it's just not known.
I'll tell you what is very important, and I think that this is being missed in the context of asking the scientific questions. My instinct is that, quite as right as you said, even when they developed the smallpox vaccines, I think first there were some issues with it, and then they perfected it over time. In the same way, when we have done this massive vaccination program, we've delivered over 11 billion doses of a vaccine. So they are remarkably safe, whatever complications we may have.
Yeah.
And so there may still need to be tweaking to the technology. And that's a good thing. The problem is that if you don't look, you then can't identify what these tweaks are. And it then can impact the further development. And one of the biggest concerns I have is that the remarkable breakthrough that has happened with mRNA technology could get damaged because of the politics around what is happening with COVID-19. The technology is remarkable and it has tremendous value for the future for many diseases. But if we make a mistake here now, not only will we miss the opportunity to pick up on things that could be addressed, but we also may damage the impact of the technology because of anxiety in the future from the general population.
Yeah, indeed. The other thing that I think we have to say, I mean, going back to COVID, you don't use a vaccine as a treatment. You use it as preventative agents, and it's not. You cannot use a vaccine in this way to get a preventative effect. It's not working that way. But and what has happened is that basic medicine has been forgotten. Basic doctoring has been forgotten. And you know, from the very start of COVID, people were told to stay at home and then only come into hospital if they were really ill. That was exactly the wrong thing to do. Exactly the wrong thing to do. And this is why, and I'm going to mention his name again, Shankara, Dr. Shankara Chetty. I remember talking to him in 2020 or early 2021, and you know, he was saying that what he instills into people is you need to know that the day one of infection, or rather symptoms, and you need to monitor and then tell me when you get to the sort of roundabout the first week, and if anything changes. And that's what we didn't do here. We basically told people to go away. The medical system shut its doors to people until they got really ill, and it was too late. it was just too late. Getting people into the ICU who were in a serious condition shouldn't have happened. I mean, I was talking to somebody today who lost their husband, and I was saying to Sarah, my wife, you know, that should never have happened. Nobody should have died of COVID. I mean, last time I talked to Shankara, I think he treated 10,000 people. He hasn't lost one. The only people he'd lost were those that got panicky and went into hospital. So we've played down. We haven't, but the medical system at large has played down the role of basic medicine, basic good physicianship, looking at the patient, talking to the patient, instilling in them that, you know, that they need to take control of their own health. But the problem is we haven't given them any tools to do that. And the basic tools that Shankara was using, as you know, they were very, very simple tools. They were antihistamines, Montelukast, steroids. Incredibly simple, but that information didn't get to the public. But what did get to the public was the use of vaccines, the use of fundamentally new vaccines, never been used on a population before. And yes, I agree with you. When you bring out a new vaccine like that, you have to make sure that you do all the right things and follow up. Otherwise, it will come back and bite you, and people will start, as I have done. I must admit, you know, I've been looking with a group of people in the States. We're trying to set up a vaccine research center in Florida. It's not happening at the moment, but we shouldn't be doing it. I mean, I'm retired. I don't really want to do any of this. I'm just sort of, it's interesting, but it shouldn't be up to people like me or indeed people like you. There are highly paid individuals out there that should be doing this work. They should be strictly following up on every case of potential vaccine, let's call it injury. And also we need to educate the medical professionals not to ignore any potential side effects that are linked to the vaccine. Because yes, it will mean that the mRNA vaccines in the future will be looked at somewhat dimly due to the fact that these follow-ups haven't been done. And therefore you cannot say for certain whether it was the vaccine or not. I mean, what's happening at the moment, many of the medical institutions are just ignoring the fact it could be due to the vaccine, and just none of these things get reported. I think it's a case that some of the medical professionals don't even know how to do it, and they're too busy. They move on to the next patient. So, you know, it's a bit like monkeypox, probably underreported. For how long it's been underreported, we're just focusing on it now. It might have been like this for years. Who knows? But certainly with the vaccines, there's a huge amount of underreporting. I think even academic studies suggest that with most vaccine adverse effects, there are, you know, it's only 10% of those that get reported. So it's a huge database that we need.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so as we close out now, Chris, in terms of where we are now, if you were speaking to the Ministry of Health or you got the health minister to discuss these concepts too, and we are seeing the start of something that could be nothing, but that's what we thought at the beginning of COVID-19 as well. What would you be saying at this point to those people in positions of leadership?
It's a fine line to tread, isn't it? Because you don't want to scare the population, and this is what happened with COVID. The population was scared in a rather inappropriate way, and so you could do that for, let's say, monkeypox. I would be saying, look, let's get the diagnostics absolutely spot on. We've heard a lot about PCR testing. There's been a lot of problems with that. So we would have to make sure that was, that the genomic side of things and the sequencing was absolutely spot on. And also, I wouldn't be, crikey, rolling out mass vaccination campaigns for something like this. I don't know what the fundamental therapy is for something like monkeypox. I don't know what the medical therapy is. But I would be looking, I always prefer medical therapy. Vaccination is a somewhat irreversible process, and this is what people don't really realize. It's you prod the immune system at considerable peril. Actually, it's such a powerful system. If we mess around with it, in the wrong way, and as I say, are we messing around with it in the wrong way with mRNA that is modified? Is it shutting down certain elements of the immune system? So I would be extremely careful. I wouldn't be rushing out with the novel vaccines for something like monkeypox. I would fundamentally focus on a medical therapy, but be rational this time. Look at the numbers; they're very low. Go back into the archival data and interrogate that. Is it any different from before? Somebody must know about this. Why, as I say, going back to this exercise, why on earth would somebody why would a team pick on monkeypox? It puzzles me. It's not something that crossed my mind at all. I never wanted to know anything about monkeypox, quite honestly. It's not something that in this country we know about. African countries may be, yes, of course, but not here. So I just be rational. Take a very pragmatic approach to this. Don't go down the route of vaccination. I mean, I assume that my age, I've had a smallpox vaccine. I'm perhaps one of the ones that is fairly immune to this. I don't know. But I certainly wouldn't be rushing out vaccines for this. I would go down the medical route, if anything.
Yes, thank you very, very much for that, Chris. So yes, I really appreciate you jumping in, and this has truly been an educational exercise about monkeypox, about the immune system, about everything that has been going on. So really, really appreciate you jumping in as well, Chris.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to my audience for waiting with us whilst we had this extra chat beyond the monkeypox issues. Stay safe, everyone, and let's keep following the science. Have a great evening, Chris, and
Thank
great
you, Philip.
evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are. Okay.
Thank you. Bye for now.